Hi everybody, welcome. And welcome to the People, Place, Planet, Refabricate edition. I'm Diane Small, Director of Reba London, and I'm going to introduce you to the Refabricate team. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they came about, what they've been up to. Then I'll hand over to one of the team members who will take it from there. But let me just explain how it happened. It all started with a few eye rolls. I was having conversations with either Paul or it was Rosie, and the question that both of them had was like, what does the RBA do for me? We're young, we need something to really get our teeth into and engage. And these were on separate occasions. I also then met another team, met someone who said exactly the same thing. So I invited each of them for coffee, introduced them to one another, and told them, come up with something. If it's something good, then I'll support it. So you're about to see what happened, what they came up with, what project they came up with, and then how it's developed. So I think from now on, let me just hand over to Kate.
Hi everyone, welcome to the presentation. So we've got an introductory question for you all. How many shards does the UK produce in waste each year? If you can put your answers in the chat, we'll be referring back to that question further on in the presentation. But for now, let's start with an introduction to us. So welcome to Refabricate. This talk is part of the RBA's People, Place, Planet series, which aims to bring focus to the climate emergency, sustainability, and the built environment. So today's talk, the event will largely be looking at circular economy, as I'm sure most of you are expecting, and we'll be starting with an introduction to us, the Refabricate team, followed by the context of the waste problem and how the circular economy can offer a solution to this. We'll then be talking about the programme that we developed with RBA London earlier this year, the solutions that came out of that programme, and then the current thinking for Refabricate now and what we're planning in the future. So Refabricate is a group of young people with an ambition to expand circular economy principles in the architecture and construction industry. That is essentially what we're about, and that's what we're kind of trying to promote with the work that we do. This is the six of us. As Diane says, some of us have known each other for longer than others. I'm Kate, as you can see, the top left-hand person on your screen. I'm a Part 3 architectural assistant and I work in London. There's Giuseppe.
Hi, I'm Giuseppe. I'm an architect and I work at a small practice in London as well.
Sophie.
Hi there, I'm Sophie Zara James and I'm a Part 2 architectural assistant based in South Wales.
Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm a recent Part 2 architecture graduate and I currently work as an architecture assistant at Refurbishing.
Rosie unfortunately is unwell, but she's here in spirit. And then Tiziana.
Hello, I'm Tiziana. I'm an architect, or whether I shouldn't say that yet because I haven't got my qualification through yet. But yeah, I'm so an architectural assistant working in London as well.
Great. So between February and June this year, in collaboration with RBA London, we developed the Refabricate Project, which is a collaborative research project intended to engage young designers to innovate and develop new products, both digital and material, that offer circular solutions to the considerable waste problem. The key goals, like the platform itself, the project, really intended to empower young professionals by focusing and developing new ideas around how to enable circular economy to exist within the construction industry. And through that, we wanted to create a network of young professionals that could kind of collaborate and work together, hopefully in the future as well. Yeah. So on to you, Paul.
Thank you for the introduction, Kate. So this is where we essentially commence we present the research that we have so far, and then go into how this became the catalyst for the Refabricate program. So the first question, how much waste do we actually produce? I find this to be an interesting question because not a lot of people know. We're going to talk about this starting from a global perspective and then come down to the UK and articulate it in that regard. On a global sort of level, long story short, I suppose, we produce about 2.1 billion tons of waste as a planet. And you know, when you look at the graph on the side or the chart on the side, I think it's quite interesting when you realize that on average, for a continent like Europe, per capita, we produce about 1.4 kilograms of waste per day. It's actually quite a lot when you think about it. Actually, when you start to look into some of the other sort of pieces of research from governmental bodies like DEFRA and some other bodies, it was projected that by 2050, this is set to increase by about 70% of our current levels, which basically means by in 50 years or in 30 years time, we apparently should be producing about 3.1 billion tons of waste, which is dramatically even more. In the UK sort of context, as of 2016, we generated about 2.1 million tons of waste, which is also quite a lot. And England is responsible for about 85% of that, which equates to about 180 million tons of that waste. So when you really consider it, especially going back to the first question that we asked, I hope people are actually able to answer them. Yes. When you consider 221 million tons of waste per year, if you consider that from the perspective of the shard actually weighs about 12,500 tons. When you do the math, it actually works out to about 17,680 shards that we produce every year in the UK in relation to waste. So that's quite a lot when you think about it. So when you look into how that waste actually breaks down in terms of its in terms of different sources, the large majority, at 62%, is from the construction, demolition, and excavation industry, which is where our industry, if you will, and the rest of it is split between households at 18%, commercial and industrial at 12%, and other sources at 8%, slightly less. But yeah, just picking up on that 62% as it's actually increased over the years since 2016 to 2018. Looking into DEFRA, this is a governmental body that documents statistics pertaining to waste in the UK. You look through the document that was produced earlier this year, pertaining to the previous years. Apparently, our recovery rate of waste specific to the construction industry is about 8 to 9% and above. So when you read into it, it looks very good, and indeed it is very good. But then when you consider the terminology of recovery and how that breaks down, you realize that most of that is actually pertaining to incineration. So much so that in the UK we actually incinerate about 42% of our waste. Some of this goes into recovery, so energy, but then some of it just sort of gets burned. Looking further into sort of that research, in 2016 there was this interesting chart that was actually produced and published by The Guardian that projected that the rate of incineration in the UK was set to increase at what looks like an exponential rate. And the statistics actually documented that between 2012 and 2018, we had doubled the amount of incineration that we were doing in the UK. And by 2018, it was actually projected that incineration in the UK would surpass recycling, which is already bad. And when you consider other things that we do in the UK, we probably know, some of us know, some of us probably don't. But the UK actually exports a large majority of its waste as well to other countries, but most notably plastics. Up until 2018, the UK exported a large majority of its plastics to countries like China, Malaysia, Indonesia, until 2018 when there was a ban put in place by China, which other countries have sort of been acclimatizing themselves with too, and sort of pushing back countries like the UK and the US against the plastics that they receive from us. Which then has led us to the world that we live in today, where we are very acutely aware of our need for change, and present an opportunity for us to talk about solutions.
Yeah,
In that regard, I'll hand.
So yeah, the solution to this is mostly to adopt a circular economy process. Next slide. Which the circular economy model is actually inspired by natural processes in which no waste is actually produced. In the natural world, there is no landfill. Instead, each system feeds into each other, and the resources produced by the waste produced by one process is used into another process. Next one. We as humans are very disconnected from nature right now. We are actually using a linear economy approach in which we have this tendency to take, make, and dispose of items that we actually produce. So we are essentially producing a lot of waste. And as a society, we should be thinking more of creating items that we can actually reuse and repurpose for a better life. To the next. So the circular economy model actually comes in as a model, again, taken by nature, in which there is a biological and a technical nutrient within the process. A biological nutrient will be something that is inspired by the biodegradable model. So it's something that you can perhaps explore with packaging or some items for which you actually create objects that can biodegrade and return to soil and just feed into other processes. Whilst the technical nutrient is that of technology, for which we have a lot of items that we cannot biodegrade, like our phones or washing machines or all other items that we have in our houses. And so the idea with these is to recycle them and reuse the components and upcycle them as well. Also, there is a pretty big practice right now, which is that of landfill mining, which is a concept that is increasingly getting more attention. And essentially, this would be to start actually using our landfills as mines and to try and get the materials that we've disposed of and reuse them as new. Because essentially, we are just doing the same, but with new materials that we source from the actual source and not from what we disposed before, which is a very broken system actually to do it this way. And next slide. So how this fits into construction. Actually, the process would be very similar, in which that the materials are produced in a factory and then it gets assembled on site, and there should be a way in which we have also integrated this assembly within design and then recover the materials, and there's no waste produced within the process. There's no beginning and no end to this process. And so is to actually give value to a material, but also to consider the environmental needs. So for example, how long is the lifespan of each component that we need within a building? So for example, structure that should stay around for longer, and skin, and goes down to service space and stuff that are within the house, for example. Next. And the EU waste hierarchy as well looks at the different ways that we can reuse waste and recover it, disposing it. Next. Yeah, on to Giuseppe.
So what have we been doing? So looking back to our goals, we wanted to empower young professionals, further the circular economy, and make connections for the people we want to involve in our programme. And we wanted to do this in relation to all the research that we've just been talking about. So we put together some teams. Paul, can you go to the next slide? And we asked them to develop solutions for tackling the waste issues in construction and the wider society. So we got teams together of both architects and other creative professionals. We had quite a mix. We have 6 teams, each of them looking at a different material. So we had 2 timber teams due to popular demand, an aggregate team, a team that focused on glass, a team that focused on textiles, and one on plastics. Each of us oversaw one of those teams, so they all had one of the committee members working alongside them, trying to help them out wherever possible, and guiding them through the process. They then also had sessions with enterprise mentors. A key part of the process was about to relate this into the real world, if you like, and making it a viable business proposal to go along with the design and concept proposals, as it were. And they also had material mentors working with them. So all this came together and the group had to come up with different responses. So next slide, please, Paul. So we asked all the teams to develop their proposals in relation to a contextual response, a material innovation, and an enterprise response. So contextually, they wanted to be working within the circular economy, within construction in some cases, and within the relevant context of their material in other cases. And then developing innovation with that material, what can be done with it, how can we further, how it can be reused, recycled, reprocessed, put back into the circular economy. And then the enterprise section, as we talked about before, how can this be working as a business model and be a self-sustaining concept that we can sort of roll out if they so wish to further that. Next slide. So we started looking for participants about this time last year, and then we kicked off in February with an event at Reba. And so we had all the teams set up there. We gave a good initial introduction. And then the idea was that we were going to have a series of kind of events going along, and that they would have access to some workshop spaces as we were going. So we had the first one of those, and that happened in the Remakery, and we started to talk about some of the enterprise concepts, and also introduce them to this fantastic space where they could come and work with physical materials to develop their proposals. However, COVID then rapidly hit, and we had to somewhat rework the program a little bit, and we all went online. So we skilled up on our Zoom skills, and hosted all our events online from that point. This presented new challenges, but the teams took to it really well. Many of them went further and further into the enterprise sections, really developing a really robust business plan. And while others got really into developing their physical prototyping and testing at home. So we felt it worked really well. And then we were able to do an online presentation and exhibition at the end, which was kind of great because it also meant we could have people from all over the country attending and beyond. Some of our participants even went home as far as India and carried on working on the project. So it was really great to be able to collaborate across the globe in that context. So Paul, if you run through the next few slides. So these are a few of the images of the events that we managed to hold. So this was the initial presentations at Reba, and sort of developing our relationships. And this is the Remakery space. Next slide. So returning to what we've learned and how we can apply what we've learned into an architectural and construction context. So following the research of Paolo Sassi, who's worked with us as a mentor on this project, we're looking at 6 principles to help minimize waste in construction. These principles broadly run through the life of building from inception through to dismantling, although many are applicable throughout. So first principle is about preventing and minimizing waste. At definition and concept stage, we aim to do this as much as possible, obviously throughout. And then when designing a building, we can specify second life resources, those that have previously been used elsewhere. And then once the building is constructed, regular maintenance allows the building to last as long as possible. Buildings can then be adapted and refurbished to further reduce the need for new build. And then once the building is dismantled, materials and parts of it can be reused and redistributed. And then other materials can be recovered through recycling and composting. So we're now going to run through each of these principles in a little more detail, with the Refabricate team projects offering sort of insights into different ways of tackling this. So we go on to the next slide, Paul. So the first principle about preventing and minimizing waste. So in order to prevent and minimize waste, we need to minimize the material use in the first place. So we postulate that we could always question the brief. Do we even really need a building? Is there another solution that may be a more efficient, less material intensive way of dealing with the problem? If we can decide we're doing a building, once we're designing, can we ensure that we design as efficiently as possible? So that's structural efficiency in construction methods, using prefab methods and modular design, whether that's spatial efficiency in getting really tight designs or overlap of uses, and whether that's sort of reducing ornamentation to what you need, or clever detailing that doesn't require add-ons to create that ornamentation. So for every 6 houses we build in the UK, the equivalent of one house in waste material gets put into landfill. So you can see it's a massive issue we need to address. So we go on to the next slide, Paul. So once we're into kind of designing and making, we can talk about what materials we specify. And one of the key ways of reducing waste is if we use something that's already been used. So if we're using it a second, third, fourth time, ensures that that material that we're reusing doesn't become waste itself. So we can reuse existing buildings, we can reuse components of buildings, and we can use recycled waste. And then, so if we want to, so it's just all about thinking about how we can utilize those different streams. So we go on to the next slide, Paul. So this is talking about Team Timber 2's research in relation to the previous principle. So one of the issues with specifying these recycled materials is they're often seen as low quality and less desirable. So Team Timber 2 developed wood, and this aims to change the perception of recycled timbers by creating a beautiful recycled timber that celebrates its recycled nature. So the timber panel is made up of waste timber that's then been reassembled into a beautiful collage of wood types. Next slide, Paul. The timber waste is collected from construction sites and reformed into the wood panel using a beeswax binder. Each project then comes so then the products that we make out of those panels are then kind of sold on, and they come with a QR code allowing the user to trace the origin of the timber, this further celebrating its recycled nature. So in this way, they aim to use this celebration of recycled timber to create something that acts as sort of quite a luxury product, really highlighting how recycled nature of things doesn't have to be considered lesser, if you like. Next slide, Paul. So the third principle is about maintaining and the prolonging life of building. So we do regular maintenance. We obviously prolong the life of the building and reduce the need for dismantling and building anew, and therefore saving the material and retaining any of the carbon associated with that. Next slide, please, Paul. So principle 4 is about refurbishing a building. So once a building's reaching its end of life, we think about refurbishing rather than taking down the building new. So the greenest building is the one that already exists. Refurbishing and retrofitting dramatically reduces material use and often creates beautiful architecture. So the Architects Journal started a Retro First campaign, encouraging all architects and developers to consider retrofitting existing buildings instead of dismantling and building anew. This should also be considered at the early stage of designing new buildings. If we can design them so they can be easily adaptable and flexible for future use, that enables the life of the building to continue as long as possible. With the next slide, I think I'm going to hand over to Kate.
Hello. Right. So the principle number 5, reuse and redistribution of materials. This principle looks at buildings as material banks with the value of the building is equal to the value of the components themselves. As such, building components and construction methods should be designed for disassembly and utilizing mechanical fixings and single origin materials over composites to ensure elements can be reused elsewhere with no depreciation in value. So the images here are from Rota DC in Belgium, and their organization, they go into demolition sites and salvage materials and products that are still of use and of value. So they salvage those materials, process them and resell them. So essentially reusing them in other buildings. This is obviously a really fundamental part of enabling a circular economy within construction. And if you're interested in learning more, the EU Buildings as Material Banks gives some great guidance on this, which we actually have a link for at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So Team Glass really focused on Principle 5. GlassPass is the name of their product, and it is an upcycled glass certification service that provides a glass DNA database and which collates, tags and tracks certified glass products. Next slide, please. So this product really combines a material passport, virtual database and environmental certification system. It aims to aid sorting, which is one of the main issues with glass waste. Despite actually having the potential to be completely remelted indefinitely, end of life construction glass is actually rarely recycled into new flat glass, and often ends up in landfill or downgraded quality. So the database itself is created when each glass panel is produced. It's then updated as the tag is applied during processing, and then which then contains relevant information for the demolition contractor as well as the flat glass manufacturers, so that they can disassemble, separate and retrieve post-consumer flat glass. So in the future for Team Glass, their plan is to build on this platform as reuse becomes more common within the industry, so that specifiers can map where they can find glass that's of the kind of quality or the needs that they have for their site. So that's their future goal, and this team is actually hoping to take the project forward as well, which is great. Next slide, please. So Principle 6, this is the principle that actually a lot of our teams focus down on. So this rather than reuse, this is looking actually at the recovery of waste. So we've heard obviously about GlassPass that was focusing on reuse, and Timber 2 that was looking at kind of prolonged life. These projects that we're going to go into are looking at recovery of waste. So part of this is looking at focusing on, so this kind of is divided into recycling, but also composting. So this really relates to the diagrams that Tiziana was talking about in terms of circular economy. So recycling is really looking at, obviously fairly straightforward, really looking at how we can actually enable materials to be as recyclable as possible. That's like non-composite materials, a single origin, so through that, there's also issues within this that we need to conquer in terms of enabling kind of engaging like individuals as well as businesses to encourage and incentivize reuse. So yeah, next slide for that. So the first team that really focused on this was Team Aggregate. Well, not the first team that we're going to talk about, I should say. So Grounded Tea, their product, is a biomaterial aggregate manufacturer that creates ceramics from waste produce. Their debut product is a kitchenware collection made of the used coffee grounds of London's coffee shops. So what's interesting about this is the product itself is looking at incentivizing businesses to kind of recover the waste that they produce. Next slide, please. The project itself was inspired by the environmental and ethical issues of sand mining in parallel to the considerable amount of used coffee grounds that are produced each year by individuals as well as coffee shops and companies. So they developed a circular product born out of a reciprocal relationship between themselves and coffee shops and organizations. So the Grounded Tea reforms these relationships with a series of coffee shops or companies who offer them their coffee waste, which is then processed into biodegradable kitchenware and re-provided to the coffee shops as a subscription service. So it's quite reciprocal in that sense. This is also, yeah, as I said, this is applicable to businesses as well. And the kitchenware can also be sold to private consumers additionally. So finally, all products are fully biodegradable at the end of life, and the project itself had long-term goals of actually building on top of coffee waste, looking into other types of biodegradable aggregates to start to move the project so that it could almost become structural ideally. Next slide. So I think I'm passing on to Paul.
Yes, thank you, Jay. And I think my camera should be working now. Apologies for what it looked like before. Yeah, so I was I guess I was the committee member working in the plastics team, and through the course of the program, they put together essentially what we're calling a reward-based sort of network / system called My Plastic. The website is actually launched at the moment, and we're still in the process of developing what that could look like. But the premise is to provide a solution essentially that encourages households to properly sort and recycle their plastics, mainly to sort their plastics by providing this sort of reward-based system as a sort of incentive in partnership with local authorities and companies who are part of the UK Plastics Pact. So it's creating a system and a network around that and putting the user, i.e. the household, at the center of it. So within this scheme, a proposal, the team is actually proposing two elements. The most prominent being sort of the mobile application, which is the main interactive element by the user that allows the individuals of the households to essentially organize their plastics and book collection points, take them to collection points, book collection systems, and sort of track their progress, their recycling progress in real time. That was one of the sort of things that came out of our research, and the fact that most of the data, especially pertaining to plastic, they're either too large to understand and decipher, or they're too little to be relevant. So we're essentially trying to strive towards a future where the recycling of plastics as a sort of catalyst in a home, for example, is so regular that you can extract real-time information that feeds data and also feeds the entire recycling process of plastics. The next one, timber. So timber and going into the recovery of waste again. I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, Team Timber 1 looked at the recovery of waste, just in a slightly different way, which it was more related to create biodegradable products that actually don't use any chemical and toxic binding agents. So Team 1 actually came up with the idea of creating an acoustic panel that is completely made, again, of biodegradable materials. So to the next slide. Their product is called Warwood, and the team started exploring with bark, and then went on to sawdust to actually find a way to create acoustic panels that, again, do not use toxic binders, and eventually to disrupt the MDF and particle board industry, which is an industry that we maybe not really think about too much, but actually most of the furniture and most of the things that we have in our homes, in our offices, in restaurants, everywhere, are actually made of particle boards materials, which are held together by a toxic binding agent. So the team actually was able, through a lot of exploration with different types of binding agents, between which algae and potato starch as well, they came up with the this acoustic panel, which was shown in the slide before, which is fully biodegradable and can just go back into the soil, and eventually could be reshaped and remolded into new acoustic panels. The team is actually looking to progress with the project, and they're still talking to each other and actually aiming to launch the product on the market at some point, which is very exciting. And I think it leads on the next.
Hi there, I'm Sophie. Yep. And lastly, Team Textiles created a collective called Rerope. The group was made up of a wide variety of talented professionals and students. Rerope developed a proposition, a collective, if you will, which aims to encourage circular economy through good design and educational outreach. Press the next slide. Oh, thanks. The proposal upcycles unwanted or unrecyclable textiles, such as clothes waste, into a new rope product. The rope is then designed to be used in various upcycling projects, repurposed into a catalogue of flat pack modular furniture. This proposal provides an alternative use to textile landfill, responding to the vast amounts of waste gained from the fast fashion industries. Provides a tactile and visible response to understanding where and how your textile waste can be reused, while also providing a bespoke piece of furniture and visual aid to help remind, educate, and think twice about textiles you consume. This response sits firmly in key principle 6, the recovery of waste, like many of our material teams from Refabricate 01. Next slide. In summary, when attempting to minimise waste in construction, we kept coming back to these questions. Where does the material come from? Basically, a location to site distance. Is there another more suitable local material which can take its place? What is it made of? Can it be recycled and reused in some way at the end of its life? Does it fit into a greater circular economy of resources? How is it sourced or extracted or harvested? Is this done in a way which doesn't deplete the original source? How long will it travel and how will it travel? Again, challenging ourselves by asking how can we design and build using as much local resource as possible? Then how will it be fitted? Perhaps this question is the efficiency of how it will be packed to travel. Are there ways to minimise the carbon footprint of the item? Also, this might question how your materials are put together. What is your fixing agent, if you have one? Will it prevent the material from being recycled in the future because of how it has been fitted? For example, a complex plastic chemical glue. And then how long will it be used for? What is the shelf life of your design? How does this affect what it's made up of? And where will it go when the building ceases to exist? How does it dismantle and how does the element get recycled? And lastly, will it become waste or value? How do we prevent it becoming waste and actually prepare it to be a useful material yet again in the future? Okay, next slide. Okay, moving on, you may be feeling a little overwhelmed by all of those difficult questions. So let's talk about the next steps for us. It may have crossed your mind, what might Refabricate be doing at present? Next slide. Thank you. We're doing a couple of things, including we're currently preparing and have been involved with People's Pavilion Youth Project, which started in September and runs through till August 2021, organised by Beyond the Box. It's a competition which is inviting 14 to 19-year-olds from a handful of London boroughs to participate in a series of co-design workshops. We're truly excited to be working with Neil Onions, the founder of Beyond the Box. The project is also collaborating with a bunch of other people, including Paul Collective, Unsense Architecture, and the V&A curator Manisha Calais, just to name a few. There is a lot of incredible input from various other organisations and individuals as well. To find out more, please go out and follow Beyond the Box and on all the platforms. And as we speak, we are also collating everything we learned from Refabricate 1 and redesigning and discussing what Refabricate 2 in the coming 6 months, I guess, will look like. So watch this space, we'll be in touch. Next slide, please. This is a proverb. It is an old proverb that is something that we as a group have held on to for a long while now. I guess for me, this quote challenges me to be a young woman who plants trees both literally and metaphorically as we try to build or reshape the society we find ourselves in. Next slide, please. We fundamentally believe that there needs to be a loud call for systematic change. We are working hard to explore what that change might look like and how that affects our profession. And I hope that we've demonstrated that in the talk that we've given you today, but also how this affects our personal lives and our consumer choices that we make every day from day to day. Next slide, please. As we're drawing to a close, we've prepared this slide full of organisations which have supported and helped inform us, and also some useful resources. We encourage you to continue reading with us around these topics. We encourage you to be part of this ongoing conversation and learning. And ultimately, we encourage you to help us all find the change that we need to see in this world. Please use this time now to add to this list via the chat box. We want to hear about what you guys are reading and what is inspiring you at the moment regarding this topic, obviously. Next slide. And we are Refabricate. Thank you for joining us for this talk. Feel free to join our mailing list to hear current news and upcoming news, or utilise any of the social media platforms shown here to see in more detail what we have been up to in the past and in the future. Next slide, I think. Thank you very much for listening. Time permitting, I believe we will now be open to a couple of questions from all of you lovely lot.
If anyone in the audience has any questions for the team, just let us know on the Q&A chat.
Maria, I have a question.
Great.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this is for all of the team. This is Diane, by the way. I just want you to kind of share what you started off with. You know, when you sat around that table and said, we're going to do this project, what you had in mind, and compare it to what the outcome was, but not just the physical outcomes, but what skills and techniques did you learn and develop during the process?
Wow. Paul, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's interesting. When Diane was talking about the initial conversation, there was 3 of us at the time. There was myself, there was Kate, and then there was Rosie. Unfortunately, Rosie isn't able to join the conversation today. And I remember we were at Greenwich and we're trying to sort of think about ideas And at the very least, we knew that we wanted to sort of start the conversation around the climate emergency at the time. So we didn't really know what it was going to turn into, but we had a rough idea of what we were trying, the kind of conversation we're trying to have. But we did know that we wanted a way for sort of young professionals to get involved in the conversations around, the climate emergency, especially from kind of the root of the construction industry, but also to try and create conversations in other industries. So that was sort of the broad aspect, and then we sort of created a brief around that. And I think over time it really sort of developed and became what it now is today. I think I'm just going to answer the second question, and then I'd like to hand it over to someone else to give their interpretation too. In terms of the skills that we've learned, personally, I think being in charge, I guess, of a team, for example, the plastics team. There was 7 of us for a period of 6 months. That was very new to me. I'd never been in a position of setting up meetings and typing notes and appointing tasks and I guess general management skills. So that was very new for me. It was very useful for me to gain those skills, and I still sort of carry some of those things across even to now. But then secondly, it was particularly challenging for me too, because I was sort of doing this in the middle of my second year of masters in Cardiff. So that was sort of an interesting experience as well to sort of pull through. And I think the COVID-19 sort of effect, if you could call it, allowed us to really sort of think outside of the box in terms of what the Refab program could become. Setting up online meetings, sometimes rethinking some of the projects that we were coming up with in the individual teams. I think it affected us, but it affected in a positive way because it allowed it to expand even further than we previously imagined.
Okay, so we have a few questions for the team. The first one is, will any of the research be published at any point? Great work.
I'd like to hand it over to
I can. There's an article written that we kind of were interviewed for in the Reba Journal in the September issue, where you can read a little bit more insight into the projects. We also have quite a lot of information on our website about the different teams' work and videos of their final presentation. So that's information about what they produce up till June. The projects that are being taken forward, they also have their own websites, which are linked from our website, so you can find them through there as well.
The next question is, when is Refabricate predicted to start, or are there any other ways to help get involved before then?
Someone else want to take this question?
Sure, I'll go. So the next Refabricate, we're still working on. We're trying to think about different ways, whether we're going to be in full COVID mode or otherwise. So as it's quite loose at the moment, but it will be a sort of a number of months, hopefully less than 6. And the best way to get involved is to go on our website and sign up to our newsletter and to follow us on our Instagram. And we will definitely be in contact with any programs going forward. In other things, as you can see, we're also getting involved with other projects. So if there's something that you are particularly interested in or think we'd be suited for, then please email us directly and we can talk about doing collaborations together, and we would be very open enough for doing that.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question is, thank you for a very interesting lecture. You mentioned earlier that landfill mining is becoming popular as a concept. I hope I got it right. Would you be able to recommend sources, organizations to find out more about this?
Yeah, I'm just posting a couple of links in the chat as well. And essentially, the most that I heard of is actually in Belgium. There's quite a few projects that actually are looking into going into landfills and actually mining the waste. I think there was a lot concerning metal waste actually, because a lot of it actually can be remelted and just reused as you would do with like first-hand metal, and so they were looking into recycle a lot of that and mine for a lot of metal. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Is there any scope to identify industrial partners to take these ideas further? Are the RABA able to facilitate these conversations whilst ensuring that the original team remain involved? Diane, do you know if we could give this an answer?
Oh, I think you're muted, Diane.
Sorry, Maria, can you repeat the question? What was the question? Hello?
Sorry. The question is there any scope to identify industrial partners to take these ideas further, or are the RABA able to facilitate these conversations whilst ensuring that the original team remains involved?
Right. Well, as the guys mentioned, I think 3 of the teams want to take it further. So we have kind of deposited, we're going to deposit a seed funding for them to develop it, take it further and seek out sponsorship. But essentially the whole idea of this project was for the individuals to take ownership of their project. And there was also that kind of business element that I wanted them to think about, i.e., when we finish this, what next? How are we going to approach for sponsors, partners, or to take it further? So I guess those teams that want to take it further, that's what they're going to be exploring right now. But we'll always be happy to support them.
Just to say, in addition to that, like our class team, for example, is in contact with a class contractor at the moment, and they're working with them in developing their products. So like each of the teams have actually been really innovative in developing these or entrepreneurial in developing these relationships already to kind of adapt their products for the commercial market.
Oh, great. Next question. Really impressed by the thinking going in the innovative products and systems. What do you think will be the most important route to change new product systems or adapting the current go-to products and systems being specified? Does anyone from the team want to take this?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
The question says, what do you think will be the most important route to change new product systems or adapting the current go-to products and systems being specified?
I think that's I'm probably not the best person to sort of answer that question because it sounds very full. But I do think, you know, what we were trying to explore in the plastics team was some digital routes, the glass team as well, because I think there is a substantial sort of part of the whole recycling and recovery process that is to do with data and how much data we actually have in regards to how much real data we have in regards to, for example, how much waste we produce per, for example, I don't know, county or company per se. So I think what we were trying to sort of establish was a digital route going forward to allow for that to happen. I'm not sure if I have the best answer or an answer in regards to how we could adapt sort of our industrial processes, but I would say at the very least is to sort of establish digital routes.
I could, on top of that, I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So I feel like both products need to be developed to become more kind of circular in how they are designed, which I suppose is adapt to new products. But there's also a lot of structural issues in kind of how procurement of buildings happen that could be adapted to encourage more circular thinking. Because right now, like, it's not necessarily the most cost-effective thing, salvaging building materials, and that's something that at policy level we need to start to work towards resolving.
Hi. Just to also add on to that, I was just thinking about that question, and something about it I think is going backwards a little bit and creating materials which are so simple that they're easy to then recreate into something else. So they're not a complex mix of loads of different things, which makes it difficult then to recycle afterwards, after life or whatever. But obviously there are already products out there and things that need to be recycled which don't have those characteristics. So it's finding out how to recycle that stuff, but then also going forward, choosing a lot simpler materialistic kind of palette to then be building with. That might be just like a personal idea of how I would like to design in the future, but I'm sure my colleagues agree with me somewhat.
I just kind of wanted to add one more little thing into that too. One thing that I've been sort of trying to explore, I'm still a part two, so I'm trying to become an architect, I guess. I have been exploring sort of modular design well, further in that conversation as a route for design and buildings, i.e. specific to the fact that if you have a modular design, there's an opportunity for you to specifically quantify the amount of materials that you need to construct the building. And I think there's a whole narrative around that stuff to be unpacked in terms of how we, for example, deliver residential buildings, which I'm currently working in. So that's a route that I'm looking to explore as I become an architect.
Thank you, Paul. Next question. Will there be any new groups in the future so people can join?
I think Giuseppe kind of answered that, but we're in the process of developing our Refabricate 2 initiative, especially in relation to the COVID issues currently. So we're kind of developing that now. But as he said, if you follow us on social media and sign up to our newsletter, we'll keep you updated on when we're looking to recruit new people.
And along with that question, I guess, have you guys considered to go outside of London with the project?
Sophie, do you want to answer this one?
Why I am outside of London, I am currently in Wales, zooming you from all the way in Wales, crazy. But I think we have discussed it because actually, at a time like this, it's so easy to be all across the UK, and even, as we said, like in India and stuff like that. But I think we need to take it step at a time in terms of how we go about expanding in that way. But we definitely, it is on our agenda. We're looking to go further afield and not just be London centric. Yeah, and those, I love that you've given us those designers in Scotland and things like that. That's great. Thank you for adding that to the conversation.
For the next question, and I think we're getting closer to the end of the event, but for the last questions, how did the interdisciplinary teams work together, and if there were any particular barriers to successful collaboration?
Tiz?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to source the teams as varied as we could. So we also send out invitation to other professional institutions, such as the Landscape Architects institution, and then all sorts that we could think. And actually, we got a quite varied team. And then when we registered the participants, we actually asked them to express an interest on the team they would like to be involved. And so we then were able to mix different people from different backgrounds in different teams. So we had teams that had architects, some with landscape architects, mixed with product designers, service designers, and as well material specialists, which were quite great to actually mix and have these different views on the same project. And also I think this helped quite a bit with the enterprise section of the Refabricate project, which again, to actually make a product that is viable to be launched on the market, it needs to be feasibly economically. and have a sort of a business plan. So there were people in teams that were like keener on understanding the economic side of a product, whilst others were more conceptual and more related to the actual material proposition. But yeah, yeah.
Okay, and for the last question, someone anonymous commented, "I'm with you on the reuse refurb of buildings, but clients can be a bit one-track minded and focus on cost. Are there any ways of making the strategies you describe more desirable to clients in terms of cost?"
I think it's a difficult one because actually you just have to sell the benefits that you're getting from using natural local materials or reusing, refurbishing old buildings. But yeah, it's something that we're all probably going to have to struggle with in our professional lives as we try and sell it to the client. But as these buildings hopefully being built, or places or spaces being built, become more mainstream, hopefully it will gain some kind of momentum. But that's what I'm hoping anyways.
I think it's also worth saying that the six of us are all quite early on in our careers. So I think in terms of developing ideas for kind of like developing this kind of relationship with clients in relation to this, I think that's something that we're kind of trying to learn more about now too, as we kind of qualify and develop our careers, working with people more senior to ourselves. So that's something that we're also looking into learning more about.
I think if I can just add, sorry, a little bit, I think it goes back into the idea of systematic change as well. So I think the more we talk about these things, the more that we just try to make clients aware, and just general public and users of buildings aware of these situations and the reasons why we need to change, then the old system is going to be more understood and actually conceived as the system that we need to be approaching in our future and in our life, like for everything.
Okay, thank you to everyone who attended this event. Hopefully you can visit the Refabricate website if you're interested and keep update to what their project is going forward, and if you want to join and if they have any other news. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a good night. Goodbye.